All right. Welcome, everyone, to episode 5 of a series in regards. Quick conversations about movement and life. My guest today is the wonderful, incredible, amazing Elizabeth Markie. I'm so thrilled to have Elizabeth here with me to talk about habit. Elizabeth is a brain-based coach and a heart math resilience coach. And she also developed a program called Tri-Brain. We use Tri-Brain in the yoga studio. Elizabeth and I have worked on Tri-Brain stuff in the past. It's really about integrating your head brain, your heart brain, and your gut brain. And I'm so thrilled to just know Elizabeth and to be doing this work with her. I think often, and I talk about often if you take my classes or you've engaged with me a lot, about trying to find a way to make my intuition and my chatter mind kind of meet in the middle in the heart. And that's what all of Elizabeth's work is based on. And, I could have easily had Elizabeth on as a guest for any of the other topics, but habit seems so apropos. And as you'll see, and I hope you continue to see in all of the episodes, all of the topics really blend together to create a holistic view of movement and of life. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hey, Caitlin, thanks for having me. This is so much fun. I haven't seen you in forever, right? So being with you in this way is great.
Yes, and that's why we love this Zoom platform for these interviews rather than a podcast during this time, because I think we all just miss each other's faces. So it's great to see you too. So today we're talking about habit. And if you look up habit in the dictionary, what you're basically going to find is that it means a settled or regular tendency or practice, especially though one that's hard to give up. So when things kind of change from maybe like a pattern or a practice to a habit is when it becomes a difficult thing to put down and walk away from, or maybe even a difficult thing to really be aware of and see. So I wanted to talk to Elizabeth about habit today. And I wanted to ask you, Elizabeth, let's just start the conversation with the fact that we have habits. We're going to have habits. That's what bodies and brains do to be efficient, right? Can you explain to us from a neuroscience perspective, how habits are formed?
Absolutely. And the one thing to remember there is the habit is actually your brain being very efficient. We are wired to be habitual. Everything we do is a habit. And most people associate the word habit with bad habit. But the fact of the matter is that, you get up in the morning and you brush your teeth. That's not necessarily a bad habit, right? But it is a habit, the way you brush your teeth. If you start really paying attention, even when you're in the shower, whether you reach for the soap or the shampoo first, and the order in which you do things, that is a habit. That's how you're wired. Everything we do, especially if we do it more than once, starts to create that neural pathway that then forms to be a very efficient way of doing business and performing. So habits are formed with, like I said, everything that we do, anything that we do in repetition. So, the first time you do something, if you don't like it, you don't go back to it for the most part. In terms of when you're trying to form a good habit. A lot of people say, I want to start exercising. And so then they'll go and they'll work out somewhere and it just doesn't work for them, right? And so they don't go back a second time. But if they take the opportunity to go back a second time and a third time to actually get the feel of it, right, to where dopamine or endorphins are released, then they'll come back for more and then it becomes a habit.
Awesome. That's such a beautiful explanation. And thank you for pointing out that habits don't have to be bad. That's something that we know in yoga. If you study yoga philosophy in the Yoga Sutras, one of the major tenets is that habits can be beneficial, hurtful, or totally benign. So habits can be neither here nor there, or habits can be helpful to your life, or habits can be hurtful to your life. And so I think that's a really important distinction, because I think you're right. Most of us just going through our day, when we think about habits, we think about smoking or something, but also running could be a habit that you form.
Oh, absolutely. I think I used to have that habit and then I broke it. But one of the things that's interesting that most people don't realize is the habits also, especially when you're trying to form a good habit or even breaking a habit, there's one operating principle of the brain and only one, and that's to keep you alive, right? And your brain doesn't keep you alive by making your heart beat. You can be brain dead and your heart still beats. Your brain keeps you alive by responding to either threat or reward. And we look to avoid threat, right? And we move away from threat and we move towards reward. And so a lot of times when you're looking at, particularly for athletic performance or even yoga, setting goals, right? We have either avoidance goals or approach goals. And how we look at those situations, whether it's a threat or reward, determines how we're going to behave.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That's so great. So Allison's already asked a question and it's like really related to what you just said. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump in with it. I, of course, have other notes and things that I want to get to with you, but my absolute favorite thing is when we get audience engagement. So Allison, thank you for your question. And Allison's question is, Elizabeth, why are some large life-changing habits sometimes so easy to adopt, but then we struggle integrating micro habits that might take up a minute or less of our day? You just talked about, you didn't use the word consistency, but you were just talking about consistency, which we talked about on episode 2. And so would you say that consistency plays into this, just repetition?
Oh, absolutely. Consistency is the key, right? So even if it takes a minute, where are you putting that minute? And how often are you doing that minute? You know, it's interesting because I teach heart math techniques, which are built for
sometimes so easy to adopt. Sorry.
That's okay. And it's hard to get people, it's harder to get people to set aside a minute or two. I teach, what is that, Caitlin?
That's me trying to reply to Allison's comment on Facebook and the volume of the Facebook talking, which is us delayed. So let's just, I won't do that again. And you just answer Allison's question.
Okay, so the minute or two. So in teaching heart math resilience techniques, they take about 2 minutes at a time. I mean, you can do them for 5 if you want, but they really can be done in 1 or 2 minutes throughout the course of the day. And people have a harder time integrating a minute or two at a time than they do to set aside 45 minutes or an hour in terms of setting their aside, unless they start to recognize how easy it is to do, unless they start to see it as a reward. So short period of time versus, oh, it's, I don't have the minute, right? So I always lead them through that 1 minute and I time it and they feel the benefit of it and they're shocked for this 1 minute. So I don't know if that answers Allison's question about 1 minute, but it's really repetitive. You have to start doing it and do it over time before it becomes a natural habit. I know for me, I'm in the grocery store. Every time I'm in the grocery store, I do a heart math technique. It's become a habit when I'm in the line waiting, where I place those things. So did Allison have a particular moment or easy habit she wanted to integrate? I might be able to help with that.
I don't know. That's what I was going to try to ask her. But you're watching, Allison. So do you have an example of maybe like what your micro habit is and what are maybe also what is like the big habit that has been easy for you? I think that would really enrich our discussion. I just can't figure out the technology to be chatting that without our voices coming again, but like in the our past voices haunting us.
So one thing that also comes to my mind is a lot of times we try to do too much, right? We try to make all these changes all at once. And when you're looking to integrate a habit, a new habit, something that's good, right? One at a time is the best approach because then it can become a habit. If you've got a bunch of stuff sprinkled around, like New Year's resolutions, plural, just pick one.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think we all like sometimes we're overachievers with making changes in our life. It's okay to just make like one little change at a time. And definitely right now, like, you know, maybe somebody might listen to this podcast in like 2024 and all of this coronavirus stuff won't make a lot of sense anymore. But I think right now, a lot of us are putting a lot of pressure on ourselves and we're getting like a little bit of external pressure to like make all these changes that like, this is an opportunity to like make all these changes. And I think like, thank you for giving us permission to like choose one thing at a time. And when we've done the tri-brain stuff in the past, I've used the example of like the pile of dirt and you pour the glass of water on and how like the first glass of water that you pour on the pile of dirt like makes a few little rivers down the side. And then each glass of water you pour after that, the water is most likely to find where there's already been a pathway. And so those pathways get worn and worn and worn. So just keep in mind too, dear audience, that things that have been with you for a longer time, even if they're no longer serving you, they're going to be a little harder to shake. And something that you've shared in our workshops as well, Elizabeth, is that like, it's also sometimes, especially if you're trying to eliminate a habit that is no longer helpful, what we'll call a hurtful habit, or what people would say is a bad habit, to replace that with something else that do a little presto changeo.
Yeah, so let's talk about breaking habits too, but before I forget, something that you kind of triggered in my mind was like right now with Corona, right? And trying to do anything around habits is very, very difficult because we're all under stress. We might feel relieved that we're not going to the office every day, but there's additional stressors. There's fears in our media. There's fears of of when am I going to go to work? There's fears. I get fearful of going to the grocery store. I hate seeing people in masks. I hate wearing a mask. It just gives me anxiety. It brings the reality, I think, of the virus right to my face. And so when we're in stress mode and under stress, it's very, very difficult to change any behavior. First of all, stress will trigger old behaviors that we maybe thought we eliminated. And it's really a time to be gentle with yourself. Stick with what you know and what feels good. But if you are trying to break a habit, yes, you need to replace it with something. And again, a lot of times, if we go back to the principle of threat or reward, right? When we're trying to break a habit, it's usually because we see that habit no longer serves us. So it's become a threat. It's no longer a reward. And then when we look at replacing it with something better, one of the things that we usually do is we sort of have this false sense of everything is going to, I'm going to eat better and my body will feel better, and in whatever you place there. But we forget to also look at some of our non-conscious thought patterns in that behavior change process. And we forget to say, so what's the negative of me making this good behavioral change? Like, what am I doing this, right? And really taking the time to write that out, because the brain needs to process it and you need to become conscious of it, because otherwise it stays in the background and you're wondering why you haven't been able to give up bread. Well, you like it, right? And so maybe you're taking off too much to chew. Instead of giving up bread, maybe you need to reduce the amount you eat first, right? And so learning to be mindful of the threat and reward, non-conscious thinking that you have, bring that to your conscious awareness, and then be kind to yourself.
Or maybe even better, like I remember in some of the Tri-Brain workshops, you encouraging students to, when performing something that they want to make a habit, to have, I can't remember the wording that you used, but you would have us like think happy thoughts, essentially. Think about a place or our pet or like something that brings up really good feelings. Can we use that kind of a tool as well?
Absolutely, because it's really happy chemicals that keep us engaged in a habit, right? Something that feels good. So dopamine, right? We have the reward center in the brain is what reacts to that and produces dopamine. Adrenaline can feel good too, right? So let's say you're spinning and you want to keep on spinning or improve your performance. The more adrenaline you produce, the happier you feel, right? Those kind of goals. But definitely the thoughts around it and framing it in a positive. So instead of saying, I won't do this, right? I won't eat chocolate. Reframe that to, I will have a carrot, right? Or I will be able to do this, not I won't. So making sure you're framing it in a positive rather than a negative, because in the brain, that negative is a threat. I won't what? I won't do this. You immediately trigger the threat center, the threat reaction of the brain.
That's so interesting. So I hope that's helpful, guys. Allison's example was oil pulling. She's trying to incorporate oil pulling in her early morning routine. And I don't know, but I'm just wondering if maybe like she doesn't love it. And that's part of the reason. And I do this with my students in both yoga and fitness classes, where when I know things are getting tough, you know, I can see the faces. Like I can see that like some people are getting on the struggle bus. I'll just ask them to tell themselves that they love that feeling, that that's a transformational feeling, that they're making changes. So like that kind of thing, maybe Allison can help you. Maybe when you're doing the oil pulling in the morning, you can like remind yourself all of the benefits that you believe that the oil pulling will do to your body, and like create those good thoughts. Set a goal maybe to do that every single morning for 7 days along with the good thoughts, and see if the consistency paired with the positivity will help you to form that habit that you want to form, but that's difficult for you right now. Thank you for that question. If anybody else has questions, shoot them in the comments. I'm not going to make the same mistake I made before, but I'm going to see the questions and we're going to address them. I wanted to talk too, you know, just segue into, so there's helpful habits, there's hurtful habits, and there's benign habits. Cool. So I'm all set. I've got my good habits and I've got my hurtful habits. I've eliminated those and I've got all these good habits. Now fast forward like some amount of time, and like maybe some of those helpful habits that I developed are like no longer helpful. Actually, they've turned into benign or even hurtful because I've evolved, my life's changed, whatever. Can you just talk about also a little bit the importance of like maintaining awareness on ourselves, like in this kind of bigger way, so that we don't like turn what could be good habits into bad habits by just sleeping on it?
Yeah, so when you talk about that, obviously, I don't think about exercise, right? I'm thinking about those habits that we have called thoughts that are typically not in our awareness. And that's the other thing people forget, is that thinking is a habit. So if you have a way of thinking about something or perceiving something, that is habitual. So awareness really is the foundation in that particular direction. And even when it's attached to a behavior, which every thought is, right? So our thinking, if you remember me teaching the iceberg model, so the basis is our thought, which is electric, right? Neurons create an electrical charge when they come together. So it's a thought creates an emotion, which is chemical. So the electrical charge of neurons coming together is called a synapse, and a synapse creates chemicals in our body. And that's how we end up reacting. Our behavior is a result of our thoughts and our emotions, which then determines our results. But it really goes back to being aware of our thoughts. And that's where it all begins, right? And that's where also you need to recognize what may no longer serve you. I always give an example of, usually that goes pretty far back in our childhood, but we're social creatures. And so typically we look to do the right thing so that we're taken care of by the people around us. We're dependent upon other people. And so we may form a way of thinking or a habit in order to please somebody else, but it serves us because it keeps us alive, or it keeps the emotion, the relationship stable. You don't want to upset somebody, but then you start to lose your own sense of self, and you don't even realize it because you're still responding to somebody else. So I don't know, maybe I got too deep there, but.
No, I love it. I have goosebumps. I'm like, I want to pick at that a little bit more, because to me, that makes me feel like some of my personality is a habit that's in response to wanting love as a younger person. And so that is so deep. Can you just talk about that for one more minute?
Yeah, so I just got goosebumps too, right? So it is our personality, right? That's really what our brain is all about. As we form these neural pathways and these behaviors, or thinking, right, which then creates an emotion and behavior, that becomes our personality. And I guess the reason I do head, heart, gut, right, is because you can return to your authentic self with awareness. but it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of rewiring and recognition of the behaviors, the thinking habits that led you to become your personality that might not be serving you right now. It might not feel like you, right? You might be acting a certain way, or you talk with people a certain way, but it doesn't really feel real. So being able to move into your heart space is a piece of that as well.
What do you think, guys? Not at all overwhelming, right? It's exciting. I mean, I find it exciting, but I just want to spin it back to that. This super key piece is awareness, and like really monitoring our thoughts and the way that things are making us feel, exploring motivations, all that kind of good spuddy IS self-study stuff.
So, and a lot of times we're addicted to those feelings, right? We're accustomed to those feelings, and it's the feelings that keep us in that cycle, that vicious cycle. You know, and I'm a big Joe Dispenza fan, right? And I still think one of the best books I've read in terms of, and I've read a lot about habit, right? But the best one really has been his first book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And when you first look at it, you can be kind of offended, like, what's wrong with me, right? But when you start to really understand how your brain works and how your nervous system works and how you do become, it's your autonomic nervous system that begins to overrule you, right? Your brain is like a computer, and it's different, in my opinion, right? Because science has not yet proven. But there's two schools of thought out there right now in the neuroscience community, and that is where the brain serves as a tool for the mind. And you know, they feed each other. So the brain can take off and you're just being on autopilot. Or if you have the ability to connect with your mind, right, and stop some of those habits that have been programmed, you can access your mind and allow your mind to be the driver opposed to your brain and the habits that have been formed.
I love that. The mind can be such a bossy bitch and like commandeer the whole brain and body for itself. And we would like to find some balance with that by incorporating our heart space and our intuition. So thank you for that reminder. There's one more kind of like idea I'd love to explore. And if you guys out there have questions or comments, I still want to encourage you to get those into the comments. But if we're trying to form good habits or helpful habits, I think that it's possible sometimes to make wrong choices because of the things that we're talking about, because we have these other sort of programming habits from our childhood and so on, right? So like, how can we align our good habits or like choose our habits like very intentionally? Like, how can we like bring in the conversation about intention here and like align our daily habits and our bigger habits too with our like greater intention and our smaller intentions throughout the day as well? Like, what do we have some tools we can share with our audience about like aligning habit with intention? It's a big one.
Yeah, it is a really big one, right? Because it does sort of a both and, but it does start with intention. That's the big intention, right? That's sort of, what is my intention for how I want to live my life? You know, that's if you start there and you want to live a healthy, happy life where you engage with others and serve your community, then you have to sort of micro identify. So what does that mean exactly, right? So with that big intention there. And so if I say I want a healthy body, right? I want to be healthy. I want to be healthy so that I can serve my community, so I can serve my family, and live life fully. So how do I form a healthy body? And then with intention, identify what that means for you, whether that's through, we try and do everything, right? Nutrition, exercise, sleep, all the good things. but take 3 and say, does this serve my intention? Will this help get me there? And then form habits around that. And then the other piece is when you are looking at that one very individual habit. I have somebody who I've been working with, who started working with sleep because they were getting maybe 4 hours of sleep. They were pulling all-nighters to get work done. And the brain just doesn't function well that way. It's high adrenaline induced, et cetera. They thought they were being really efficient because they finished a product. So they really decided, okay, I'm going to make the commitment to sleep with reluctance. How am I going to get things done, right? So they said, I'm going to do it for 7 days. They set their alarm an hour before they were to go to bed so they could start to prepare for that kind of thinking because it wasn't right. They, really stuck to it. And like on day 4, all of a sudden they were like, wow, I can think, I feel different. I feel better. And so the dopamine hits, right? The proof in the pudding. And then still being intentional with maintaining that till it really becomes a well-established behavior. And, they fought with the idea of giving up their social life. My friends are out till 11 o'clock at night, but I said I'd be home in bed by 9:30, right? And so recognizing with awareness some of those triggers that would have brought them back to old behaviors. So intention, it's really staying with that. You can call it intention, awareness, focus. All of that has to be a part of habit change and habit formation.
Awesome.
That's a long answer, sorry.
Such a brilliant, beautiful answer to my complicated question that I sprung on you. FYI, family and audience, I don't give people a lot of prep for this. These are meant to be casual conversations, like you guys are listening in on Elizabeth and I drinking tea, which is what's happening. So just so you know, there's not a whole lot of prep or homework. This is just 2 people passionate about their work, chatting about big ideas. You better believe that you're going to see awareness and focus and those kinds of topics coming up in the future. Today's episode has carried us down the rabbit hole again of consistency and intention. Next week with Sheila, we're talking about alignment, and we're going to talk about aligning our habits with intention. We're going to talk about aligning our movement practices with our goals for our physical practice and all of that kind of good stuff. But just real quick, before we close out, there's a little bit of discussion in the comments about how many days do we have to do things? Brittany mentioned that in Ayurveda, it takes 40 days for whatever food you were eating the 40 days before to leave your body. So you kind of get this whole new body every 40 days. And one person said, then I wonder if I create a new diet program for myself. If I do it for 40 days, then will it get easier? One thing we know we can say to that person is give yourself a lot of that positive feedback about it, right? That will also help it get easier. But is there a prescribed amount of time for us to try a habit before we decide this isn't going to work out?
Well, I have a couple answers to that. There's been all kinds of research around that. And sometimes they say it takes 7 days. Sometimes it's 21 days. I heard one that was 27 days. The truth of the matter is, yes, if you do something repetitively over time, it becomes a habit, whether it's, 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 40 days, whatever works for you. But if you don't have the motivation behind it, if you're not getting happy chemicals from what you're trying to do, it doesn't matter how many days you do it for. It's still your thinking. Are you doing it and dreading it because it's something you think you should do? Or is it something that you're really committed to? And that commitment really makes all the difference in the world in terms of motivation. It's beyond willpower even, right? And sometimes, like I said, even in the very beginning, we get overachievers. We're hard on ourselves and we try and do too much at once. Or maybe we've picked the wrong goal. A lot of people that I work with, they know they should be exercising, right? And they've tried different things. And then when I finally say to them, well, what do you like to do? And they'll go, well, I like to walk outside. I like to dance, but yet they're not dancing. They're going to the gym and trying to lift weights. So when I say, well, why don't you just go for a walk in the woods? Or why don't you go to a dance class, right? Go do Zumba. And then all of a sudden they get engaged. And then from there, once they get that, the happy chemicals going, right? The adrenaline, the dopamine, and they feel good, the endorphins that are all created, they feel better from exercise. All of a sudden, then they start lifting weights. Then they start going to yoga. All the things they tried before that they didn't like. So start with what motivates you and makes you feel good, and then build from there in any habit.
Yes, including like your physical movement practice, like when people have injuries or they're uncomfortable, so they don't want to move. I always say like move, make whatever adjustments you need to make to like be comfortable. And it might be weird and not like ideal alignment or like your normal program, but like just keep moving. And so, yeah, that's awesome. Just find things that click, find things that work, find a way to get yourself those happy chemicals that'll reinforce the habits that you want to form. Any other closing thoughts, Elizabeth?
I don't think so. I don't know. Other than it's easier to. Well, I will say one thing: it is impossible to break a habit. You have to replace a habit. Mm. So you can't say, I'm not going to drink coffee, because there's a whole process in that drinking coffee of why you're drinking coffee, when you're drinking coffee. So switch off coffee for tea or switch coffee for water, right? But do the same habit, right? But switch the product. Don't just say, I'm not, I quit drinking coffee. Because there is a whole habit pattern. It's not just about the coffee.
Awesome. That was such a fun conversation. Thank you so much for being my guest. Thank you guys for being active participants. And as you know, this video will stay live on our Facebook, so you can tune in and watch it after the fact. And if you have questions or comments at that point, we'll be keeping an eye on it and we'll be happy to chat with you there. We'll see you next week at 4 o'clock to talk about alignment with Sheila LeGroux. Have a great day, Beeps. We love you.